Parenting, when the means justifies the ends. Firstly, a note. This presentation aims to show the benefits of consistent, consequential, non-violent discipline. Spanking or beatings are not required to raise well-mannered kids and can risk unforeseen consequences depending on severity. Consistency and immediate showing of discouraging consequences are all that is needed when applied from a young age, i.e., no inconsistency in reaction just because of age. If they are old enough to deliberately interact with their environment, and through this deliberate interaction show undesirable behavior, they are old enough to learn that their deliberate interactions generate different results and consequences. Discipline and restraint. The propaganda surrounding these terms for parenting has reached such fever pitch as to often invoke the specter of the word abuse, regardless of actual application. This can be understood to be a reaction to the observed negative results of beatings and excessive spanking, which many can recognize to be counterproductive. But as is human nature, the pendulum often swings well beyond the ideal point, off to the other extreme, where other problems are to be found. We live in a world where the adverse effect of discipline's almost complete absence in parenting is suspected or even obvious to many. The often poor result of discipline's complete absence is itself a different type of long-term deficit for the grown-up child due to the much higher probability of social skill issues that they must then overcome on their own. How can endless love, compassion, and forgiveness on its own ever be responsible for causing any unwanted character traits in a grown child? A knee-jerk reaction might be. Simply put, it is when it is applied to the child regardless of the child's behavior. A surprisingly apt simplification uses mathematical symbols is as follows. A negative child's behavior times a positive environmental response equals a negative learnt behavior. A negative child behavior times a negative environmental response equals a positive learnt behavior, and so forth and such. The current issue is that many in society would advocate that only positive parenting reactions are allowed, sometimes also known as permissive parenting, and automatically extrapolate any argument for any forms of discipline out to its undesirable extremes of beating and physical violence. The flexibility of the humans derives from our adaptability of behavior. The default behavior from birth is naturally looking out for ourselves. This is effectively an animalistic behavior, and it should be no surprise to anyone that this is, to a large extent, the default behavior of all children. We are not that far removed from our caveman ancestors as many would like to believe. The basis for a young child's adaptability is ridiculously simple. Action A causes a reaction B. If B is on the whole desirable, then they will continue with action A. No more or no less than that. Children will test every facet of human interaction and their environment, often with an eye for achieving something they believe to be desirable, whether it be food, attention, possession, control. The whole time they are learning what behaviors and actions work in getting what they think are desirable results, and what behaviors don't work. There is almost no age restriction on this. This is already well in play by the time they can crawl. Even from the earliest age, people's reaction to a child's behavior will reinforce the way that child behaves in future. The type of reaction that is shown to the child just changes over time to match the physical and mental development of the child. From staying calm and as relaxed as possible around the baby to setting feeding times and play and rest periods to match the rhythms of the parent's day, something that is the first example of the child adapting to the parent and not the other way around, to appropriately reacting to bad behaviors as they emerge, through withdrawal of attention, physical separation, and if required, physical restraint. These measures do not have to be prolonged or intensive. Toddlers require generally very little discouraging feedback before showing emotional discomfort. It only has to be immediate and consistent. The toddler will adapt. That is what they want to do. They need to learn appropriate behavior for their environment, and they cannot easily do this without constant, consistent, and immediate feedback. Is it really any surprise that the ultra-flexible minds of humans require training in all aspects of behavior? How is a child supposed to develop their imagination and fantasy if they are always overstimulated? How is a child supposed to learn to think if they are always spoon-fed the answers and actions are done for them when they become frustrated? How is a child supposed to learn patience if they are always immediately catered for? What is this child supposed to learn at all from constant bribery? What does a child learn if crying and or throwing a tantrum gets them what they want? How is a child to learn self-control if there is no incentive to do so? Many would claim that these skills develop later, well after the bad traits manifest themselves for the first time. Some even believe that tolerating this phase should be a natural maternal reaction. It is true that many a child will adapt components of these skills when they are older, quite simply because they are forced to. At the latest, once they enter into a world of other children, they are thrown into a world where continual positive reinforcement, regardless of their behavior, is brutally changed, as they are forced to interact with individuals who don't automatically bend to their whim, other children. They must then quickly adapt without the benefit of parental patience and calm explanation and consistency, as the reactions they receive come mostly from the children around them. Aside from the shock and uncertainty of having their previous reinforced behavior shown to be massively unworkable in general society, they may develop further bad traits such as violence, bullying, or simply withdrawing from interaction, instead of the desirable traits of compassion, sharing, and tolerance needed for social interaction. Human interaction is the primary basis for our behavior. No surprise that inconsistent reaction to behavior early on can lead to unstable foundations for future development. Is there any wonder that such inconsistent starts often leads to children later having such low self-esteem and being prone to bullying others? An often used double standard centers around the comment, "Babies and toddlers understand much more than you think," and "they are too young to understand," depending on what line suits the parent in regards to their current reaction to the child. So which is it? It is true that there is no point in yelling at a baby or discussing at length something to a toddler to try and get them to understand a complex human interaction, though this is a useful precedent for later on. Children do, however, very quickly react to discouraging feedback, withdrawal of attention, temporary isolation, unless the child shows signs of discomfort, normally crying. And no, this doesn't have to be due to physical violence. They are not learning that the behavior they just showed was inappropriate. Why would the child give up an action that gets them what they want without any notable consequence? Instant access to the foods they like, endless attention, and someone who does everything they want. Why would they give that up when all they have to do is cry, throw a tantrum, or behave in a way they know will get them what they want? The traits we see as childish are only a phase, as some would call it, only as long as the child is not provided with ample opportunity to see that acting in such a way is not to their long-term advantage, and often short-term. No surprise then that many of these childish traits are carried all the way through adulthood for many people. The term childish being clearly distinguished as bad behavioral traits as opposed to the term childlike, which positive behaviors such as inquisitiveness, openness, playfulness, etc. No one should be childish, even children, while everyone benefits from being more childlike, even adults. Parenting is tough. You may have to constantly attempt to interpret actions of the child and react appropriately and as impartially as possible, regardless of your current emotional state. And toughest of all, you have to model appropriate behavior and remain consistent. Do as I say, not as I do, is unfortunately quite a common saying, and on a subconscious level, at least, never works. Parenting is not about aiming to make a child happy regardless of the consequences, to be their friend and hope somehow that they will develop into reasonable beings, to later blame others and society and say, "When they were with me they were fine. I showered them with only love and affection and gave them everything they wanted. They were happy." I hope that I have reinforced the line that what children want and what children need are often very different things. Parenting is about being a guardian, sacrificing your own needs and desires to ensure that the child has a stable, confident base of behaviors for successful interaction with others, and in doing so greatly increasing their chances for long-term sustained happiness later on, and even now. Some people believe that discipline will rob a child of a happy childhood, when the opposite is true. Discipline does not need to be long. It only has to be long enough to generate emotional discomfort. For toddlers, a timeout of a few minutes is normally enough, and feels like an eternity to them. As long as the child knows their actions, behaviors will generate prompt, discouraging response, from their perspective, they will quickly adapt their behavior, and be the happier for it. 5 times 5 minute timeouts to clearly show a behavior is unacceptable is considerably less time than hours and hours of the parent getting gradually angrier and angrier while the child tests its behaviors to see what it can get away with today. Discipline does not require anger, which is in of itself a poor example for the child. You must show your displeasure clearly and react with enough conviction to generate emotional discomfort, but controlling of emotions is something you actually want to demonstrate to the child. Relying on anger to trigger discipline or discouraging reactions almost guarantees your reaction to the child will be erratic and inconsistent, imparting completely the wrong message. You know when a behavior is inappropriate, angry or not. Not reacting to bad behaviors at its outset will often lead to a build-up of anger until, depending on the mood of the parent, an often more extreme form of discipline eventuates. An unnecessary rhythm that helps no one over time. Oddly enough, endless love and attention regardless of behavior with the aim to keep the child always happy all the time can take considerably more effort and sacrifice from the parent than a measured amount of discipline. That makes it even more tragic that this practice often leads to behavioral traits in the child which result in such bad interactions with the parents later on, as well as society in general. At the other extreme, violence against children is never desirable in any form and is simply not necessary, and if applied inconsistently, completely worthless and potentially destructive. Both are inconsistent because they don't reflect the feedback that these kids would get in the real world from others for displaying similar behaviors as they grow up. Consistency is key right from the get-go, not some arbitrary point when they have to suddenly grow up to another arbitrary point. Empathy, sharing, patience, self-control. None of these stop you being a kid. They just help you be a better kid and a better adult. I hope that this was of interest to some and you were able to take something out of this. Until next time, all the best.